Oh, sorry, viewer, if I seem a bit out of sorts. You caught me at a very precarious time. I was told that a spirit was going to be visiting me with a very important message at any moment, and I guess I'm just a little bit jumpy. Ooh, oh, stop it. Oh, it's you. It's me. It's us. Yeah. Look, I do have a really important message for you, actually, and it involves your immediate future. So listen up. Before you deliver this message, I must know. Is it something that I want to know? Will it disturb me to the core so much that my life will become a debilitating mess, looking everywhere and anywhere for meaning and finding you're going to want to know this. I mean, it really... Or will it be a message of hope? That I am to do great things? That all of my struggles will forge me into a leader, a merciful bastion of hope for the people? Did the dog fart? Look, I tried to tell you, man. Is that what you came here to tell me? Yes, that's what I was trying to tell you. Look, the good news is that by the time you're ready to record the review, it'll largely leave the room. And that's good, right? Well, yeah, I think that's good. I guess that is good news. Yes. Everyone who loves the story A Christmas Carol usually has their own favorite version that they like to see on film, whether it's Mickey's Christmas Carol or The Muppets or even Bill Murray's adaptation with Scrooge, which is a classic and fun to see. However, I do have my own favorite version, and I'm going to try to make the case for why it should be your favorite version to watch at least once a year as well. And the adaptation I'm talking about is the 1951 A Christmas Carol starring Alastair Sim. I'm going to talk about two reasons why I think this adaptation is the best version. The beauty of Charles Dickens' 1843 novel A Christmas Carol is that it's essentially a pilgrimage, one in which we should go on at least once a year to help remind us that our decisions and actions have ramifications beyond our immediate understandings. They're kind of like throwing a pebble into a body of water and watching how the ripples just sort of run out into the vast, oceans. At the end of this pilgrimage, we're challenged to emerge, like Ebenezer Scrooge does, with a renewed spirit of hope in goodness and kindness and a yearning to help others. At least until that jerk cuts you off in traffic and almost kills you, and you start hearing that kid in front of you in the grocery line screaming at the top of his lungs, and someone takes what you wrote on social media out of context, or maybe you just say one negative thing about the Animaniacs reboot. Now I'm going to ask you a simple question, and I want you to take a minute and see if you can answer it. Tell me, from what you can recall of the story, why exactly is Jacob Marley, that's Scrooge's old partner and the first ghost who visits him and tells him that he'll be visited by 3 other spirits, why exactly is Jacob Marley suffering so much? Do you give up? Did you say the chains? No, it's actually not. Although, don't get me wrong, it looks incredibly uncomfortable. Who would want to walk around for eternity with chains around them? At one point in the story, Jacob Marley takes Scrooge over to the window. And as soon as Scrooge gets to the window, he starts to hear these horrible wailing sounds, these lamentations, right? Jacob Marley himself actually phases through the window and joins them. And what Scrooge sees is incredibly heart-wrenching. He sees a woman in the street, hungry, with a child, and there are a whole bunch of spirits, just like Jacob Marley, with chains all over them, who are around this woman and the child, and the only thing that they want to do is help them. And the one thing that they can't do is help those in need. So the reason why Jacob Marley is actually suffering so much is because he's lost his right or his way into helping others. Oftentimes, adaptations of this story leave out this important element, this idea of losing one's agency to help others. Think about it for a second. How many times do we feel like we want to help someone or help solve a major problem only to just become overwhelmed by the sheer size and weight of it, like Atlas holding up the world kind of thing? I'll give you an easy example. Hunger. How many people in the world go hungry every day? This is a fact that we all know in the back of our minds. But when we're at the store and we're thinking about maybe purchasing an extra can of non-perishable food, it always seems like that can is such a small thing that it almost mocks the problem how small that one can is of food. We become essentially like these phantoms in the story, miserable that we can't do more to help. But that's not how we need to stay. We need to move past this idea and instead think that that one can that you buy and give to your local shelter could be the thing that springboards a rebirth or a renewal in that person who now has food in his or her belly. This is something that the 1951 Alistair Sim version of A Christmas Carol sort of puts at the forefront, right in your face. It does a beautiful job of rendering the screen, the image of the idea that these phantoms are all over us, all over the place, and yet they are absolutely miserable that they can't help. We definitely don't want to become like those phantoms. Now, I'll pose the second plot point that I want to talk about here in the form of a question as well. Let's see how you do. Tell me, why does Scrooge hate his nephew Fred so much? Now, if you said it was because of Fred's overwhelmingly cheerful disposition, congratulations, you're partially right. That does play a large role here. I know if I don't get at least 2 cups of coffee in me before 9:30 a.m., I'm bah humbugging everybody all over town. You see, Fred is the only child of Scrooge's sister, Fan. And although we don't know 100% if Fan passes away while giving birth to Fred, you sort of get the idea that that kind of happens in the way that the spirit and Scrooge talk about her. But even if that doesn't happen, we know that Fan passes away probably when Fred's quite young. And so a lot of time has passed between Scrooge and Fred that could have been spent sort of collectively grieving. And instead, every time Scrooge sees Fred, he's just reminded of his own sorrow. Scrooge absolutely adored his sister Fan. And in fact, Fan is the one who helps to mend the broken relationship between Scrooge and his father. You see, we don't really know why Scrooge's father disliked him so much. For a long period of time, Scrooge's father would send his son off to boarding school, and he wouldn't actually let Scrooge come back for the holidays. What we do know is that Scrooge's father goes through a kind of sudden change of heart, an epiphany, if you will. Does that sound familiar? So Fan comes back to the boarding school to get young Scrooge, and there's this lovely scene where you can just sort of see how much the two of them love each other. Fan represents the best of us, someone who's willing to always act on another's behalf. So when she dies, it sort of signals to Scrooge that all goodness has died, that there's a kind of injustice in the world, that someone so loving and kind as Fan could be taken away from him. What he doesn't see, of course, is that that same goodness and kindness is in his nephew, in the son of Fan. There's a tremendous amount of shame that's built up in Scrooge. Shame for the way he acted toward his fiancée, which you might recall, that's usually in a lot of these adaptations, that Scrooge almost gets married. But shame also in how he treats his nephew. Although it doesn't show itself until much later in the story, Scrooge is very much ashamed of how he treats his nephew, about how he sort of honors the legacy of his dead sister. And the problem is, if you let shame go unchecked, it will begin to change who you are at the core, almost like something that rearranges your actual DNA. And if you continually let it go within you unchecked, it can permanently disfigure you to the point that you become a kind of Scrooge. It's Scrooge's nephew who really sort of figures out the the problem with Scrooge when he says at the party, I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself. Always. I think a lot of times these adaptations lose the element of shame and how Scrooge arrived at the point of disliking his nephew, and why, in some ways, it's much worse than just him disliking the cheery nature of the nephew. There's a genuine element of shame there that has to be overcome by Scrooge. There has to be a kind of forgiveness that takes place between him and his sister as well, Fan, because he's going to have to, in his heart, apologize to Fan for how he's treated his only nephew. What's our silver lining lesson for this review? If you're going to go on this Christmas Carol pilgrimage this year, I encourage you to use the 1951 Alistair Sim version. I think you come out the other end with a better appreciation for what Scrooge actually goes through and the real true grandness of his story arc, from being this sort of shameful, pitiable figure to this amazing source of kindness and energy. And this wouldn't be much of a Christmas Carol review if we didn't end with the incredibly wise words of the philosopher Tiny Tim. God bless us, everyone.